We are in our series on Live Generous. So Thanksgiving is a big theme for November, and it has to do a lot about giving away things, giving thanks, but we also give a lot of donations away around this time of year. We give of our time. We spend time with families. This series is all about that idea of just giving yourself away, living a generous life because God generously gave us life. And so we're in our series, and today we're talking about being generous with everything. So I want to start you off and get you thinking about this. Think for a moment of the most useless, most worthless, most unnecessary purchase you have made in your lifetime. You got that? You got it in your head. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of it probably is clothing, some electronics, some kitchen gadget or some electronic. Yeah, I saw heads turn right then. Like, yes, those two. But nonetheless, we have all made purchases. Did I hear someone say a car was their worthless purchase? Yeah. Okay. We've all made those purchases that we regret it almost as soon as we get it home. There's something about it that we don't appreciate it. It didn't live up to the hype. It's not what we thought we were getting. I want to reshape that thought of whatever it was that you bought that was worthless, useless. It was a piece of junk that is now cluttering a home or probably in a storage shed somewhere. I want to reshape that and think about it. I want you to realize that it was not just an item that you bought with money, but it was something you bought with your time. So you gave up God-given days to work for the money that bought whatever it was that is now wasting away. It may already be in a landfill somewhere. That's fine. But I want you to realize that it was not just money. It's not about money, really. It's about using the resources that God has given us. And sometimes we make terrible choices, but sometimes we have to realize that we have to be appreciative of everything God has given us. I want to give a story now about a lady who learned the lesson to give everything, to be generous with everything. Her name is Elisabeth Elliot. Here's a picture of her. Some of you know her story. Some of you may not. But in 1956, her husband, Jim Elliot, was a missionary to Ecuador. And he was brutally killed. Terrible situation when he tried to make contact with an indigenous group of people that were isolated and had never heard the gospel. And so as he tried to make contact, they killed him on the spot. Him and the 4 other missionaries with him that went there to show God's love to these people. Now the story takes a drastic change when just 2 years after Jim died, Elizabeth went to live with these people that killed her husband. She took her daughter and they moved there and lived with those people. Those people that took her husband became her family. And her story is written down. She's got there's books, there's movies, there's all kinds of things. If you want to hear about Jim and Elisabeth Elliot, it would be a great story for you to dive in if this was one that touched your heart. But let me tell you something that she wrote after living with them. She said, "There is nothing worth living for unless it's worth dying for. Maturity starts with the willingness to give of oneself." And really what this was an echo of something her husband said. His most famous quote is this, and we put this one on there: "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep." to gain what he cannot lose. He is no fool to give what he cannot keep. See, the things, going back to those useless, worthless pieces of junk that you bought at some point, and we all did. So don't take a guilt trip here. Don't hear this as Pastor was getting hard on me today because I waste money sometimes. We all make bad choices with our finances every once in a while. That's not what this is about. What I want you to realize is every choice we make has consequences. It shows where our priorities are at. And with today's story, I want you to realize that if we're truly going to follow God, it's going to take everything. All that we have. So let's read. It's a short story at the end of chapter 12 in the Gospel of Mark. Some of you know this as the widow's mite. We're just going to read it. Starting in verse 41, Jesus is sitting across from the temple treasury, and he watched how the crowd dropped money into the treasury. Many rich people were putting in large sums. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 tiny coins worth very little. Summoning his disciples, Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others, for they all gave out of their surplus. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all that she lived on." So this leads me to the question we have for today. What does it really cost to follow Jesus? What does it really cost? And I know some of you are not going to like this answer, and I'm just going to give it to you up front and then explain it a little bit more. But to truly follow Jesus with our lives, it's going to cost you everything. Everything you have to follow Jesus. And see, we often count the costs. And we will make sacrifices for the things in our lives that we find value in. Think about this. We make sacrifices and we count the costs, and we will do things for our careers because we know it's going to be worth it in the long run. We count the costs and we make sacrifices for our marriages and relationships. We count the cost and we will make sacrifices for raising our kids. Some of you for raising your grandkids. We will count the cost. So when it comes to loving God and loving people, do we count the cost? Are we really ready to make the sacrifice it is going to require for us to follow Jesus in this way? So let me set the scene here for us. We read that Jesus is sitting across the temple from the temple treasury. Now, the temple in that day, there were many courtyards that were a part of the temple structure. You would start on the outside. It was the court of the Gentiles. This is anyone who was not a Jew. This is where you would come and you would be able to worship on the outside of the building. That was the courtyard of the Gentiles. If you were not a Jew, you could not go any further into the temple. There were actually signs posted that if you were a Gentile and you crossed into the next courtyard, you could be killed. It was a serious threat for them. But you then entered into the temple structure, and the first courtyard was the courtyard of the women. This is where everyone would gather to begin with, and there was a lot of just greeting each other and kindness. This is where the offerings were actually collected, the temple offerings. This is where the treasury was at. And when we say the temple treasury, what we actually mean was there were 13 different chests or or collection plates. One description of them that I read was that they were brass horns that would collect the offerings. So as you dropped it, it was sounding the horns. You could hear the drop of the coins, because all the offerings, they didn't have paper money necessarily. They had coins. They had brass coins, copper coins, that as they hit those horns, they would ring loud. So someone bringing in, I don't know if you've ever gone to the grocery store and they have those coin sorting machines there. They're loud. So when you dump in all those coins and it begins to shake them and hear them rattle around, that's what we hear when we have large offerings in the court of the women. After that, you would then go in further. The women would stay there. That's where they would worship. Then you would go into the courtyard of the men. Beyond that was the courtyard of the priests. Then you'd go into the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could go in and hear from God. He would then come out and share with the priests, who would come out to share with the men, who would go out to share with the women, who would then go out to share with the Gentiles. So the way the worship service goes, you come in, and every step of the way was an act of worship. So Jesus is just there in the courtyard of the women, and he's watching, but notice what it says. He's watching how they gave. Jesus is watching how they gave. Now I want you to hear this very clearly right here from the beginning. This is not a sermon about tithing. Tithing is important, tithes and offerings. But if this was a sermon about tithing and offerings, it'd be doing a disservice to what this woman actually gives. Because a tithe literally means only a tenth of her possessions, of her income. She gave all. So this is not about tithes and offerings. There's something bigger here than just the money value of her gift. And I want us to see that. But these chests would collect those coins, and it's interesting that Jesus was watching not so much what they gave or how much they gave, but what was the manner of their giving, how they actually approached the offering, how they approached the sacrifice. That's more important than the amount that they were giving. But he sees this poor woman, and we know two things about her. We know her financial status, she was poor, and we know her relationship status, she was a widow. So we don't know her name. We don't know anything about her other than those two things. And what Jesus says was that the rich gave out of their surplus, but she gives out of her poverty. She gives because she is poor, she is giving. Now that doesn't register quite in, there's all kinds of new math that is out there today. Have you seen some of these? I mean, when my daughters were in high school, they actually said, this is new math. I was like, isn't math been the same for like ever? No, we're going to teach you a new way to do it. And if you go and do it the old way, that's wrong now. 2 plus 2 still equals 4, right? Well, it depends. No, I'm pretty sure if I have 2 oranges and I get 2 more oranges, there's 4 oranges. But there's all kinds of different math nowadays. There's women math now. I don't know if you've heard about that. No, tell me about it. So if you buy something on sale, you have actually saved money, even though you have to spend money to save money. Okay? There is guy math that if I buy something that is a tool or something useful, it's actually saving us money in the long run, even though it costs a whole bunch early on. I saw a lot of the women just all of a sudden look, is that what you're doing? Okay. Mechanics know that. Mechanics. Well, there's all kinds of math that justify what we do with our money and how we spend it and everything like that. This one is different, though. Out of our poverty, we see this widow giving everything that she had. Out of her need, out of her desperation, she gives everything, because she knows that no matter what, if she tries to keep it and make it happen herself, she can't do it. So instead, she just gives everything to God and says, you handle it. This isn't adding up for me. So while we have guy math and lady math, and we have candy math, we just had Halloween, and that's a different kind of math there. Now all of a sudden we have God math. And God math just doesn't obey the rules. It doesn't follow a logical path, because God can do whatever God wants to do with anything and everything. But what we see here is that her act of giving those 2 small coins, which in the older translations are a widow's mite. And what that means is it was less than a penny. So she had 2 coins that were less valuable together than the smallest denomination we have today. And she gave all that. What her act of offering reveals was that her heart, her determination, and her faith was more important than holding on tightly to what she could with her hands. So, let me show you that from this we can understand how to be generous people from the story of this widow. Generous people give willingly. That's the first thing that we see here. She was not forced to bring her all the money that she had. She was not instructed to do so. This was not part of the rules. If anything, she was only supposed to give at the most maybe one of those coins and hold on to the other one. But generous people give willingly, and this widow gave her all, gave everything willingly, because she wanted to trust God more than trust her own self in this situation. 2 Corinthians 9:7 says this: each person should do as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or out of compulsion, since God loves a cheerful giver. God wants you to give what has been placed on your heart. Now, there's all kinds of stories that if we don't follow this rule, if God gives you something to do and he places that burden on your heart and you don't do it, you're going to suffer anguish on the inside because you know you have disobeyed God. So I'm not here to guilt you. I don't have to do that. We're good at condemning our own selves when we disobey God. What I want you to see is God is concerned about the attitude of your gift. Your gift, your willingness to give, needs to be out of your own desire to worship God. See, going back to this widow, we know that she lost everything. She lost her husband. And in that day and age, and I know that this may be controversial, and this is historical, so don't shoot me. This is just the way it was. This lady's identity was attached to her husband. And so when she lost her husband, she lost her identity in society. Which also meant she lost the ability to go and make money for the most part. To do anything in society, really. She was considered almost an outcast just because she was a widow. So she lost all of that. She had nothing but these 2 coins, and she decided that she wanted to honor God with everything in this moment. She didn't know what else to do. She was lost, so the only thing she could think of was, God, I'm going to give you willingly what I have. Do with it as you please. She willingly came to the offering box. So in our church, we have an offering box in the back. I don't know if a lot of times we don't point this out directly, but we have a box back there, and that is your act of worship. We decided not to make it out of brass. We didn't want to hear the clanging of the coins. You can just drop in your offering envelope or your gift, whatever you decide. It is your personal act of worship. I have a feeling, and we don't read this in the text, but I have a feeling that as she came up to the brass horn of the offering plate, she had those 2 coins. She probably bowed her head. She offered them, and she didn't let them clank or drop harsh. She probably put them in very softly, because it wasn't about getting the recognition of the gift, but it was about trusting God and doing so willingly. Generosity definitely does not happen by accident. You don't just stumble into, I'm going to be generous today. Our nature, our human nature says, no, we are not going to be generous. If you ever want to put this to the test, go work in a preschool classroom and see how generous those little tykes are with their toys. No, you don't have to teach people to be selfish. That's natural. You have to teach people how to be generous. And so generosity doesn't happen by accident. We have to be intentional. We have to be doing this on purpose and do so willingly. Isaiah 32:8 says this, generous people plan to do what is generous. This was out of the New Living Translation specifically. Other translations reword it, but in the original language, this is a legitimate translation that generous people plan to do what is generous. You have to do so willingly and on purpose. And this widow gives her gifts willingly with a purpose. The next thing we see is that generous people give sacrificially. Generous people give sacrificially. It says, out of her poverty, she gives this gift, this offering. She put in everything she had. It was costly, for sure. Because with these 2 coins, this was supposed to be her everything. It was going to pay for her whatever food she could get. It may have had to pay for the rent for that month. It may have been the supplies she needed to make clothes or to put shoes on her feet. It was everything she had that she gave. She gave sacrificially because she knew that true generosity isn't about the amount that we give, but the sacrifice behind the giving. Her generosity reveals her heart of worship. If you think about this, what does it truly cost us to follow Jesus? What did it cost you to come this morning? I mean, all of us got an extra hour of sleep. So you can't say it cost you time in bed but we had to sacrifice to get here. It probably wasn't a whole lot. It wasn't hard necessarily, unless the coffee shop messed up your order this morning. But we get up, we get dressed, we get in our cars, we come down to the church. We spend a little bit of time here and we go home. Back to our homes where we have the comfort and the convenience of things we own and things we have stored up for ourselves. Generous people give sacrificially. And if you think about this, we have examples of people who give quite a bit in Scripture. But I want you to see if you catch on to the same thing. So going through the Gospels especially, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, maybe including part of Acts, we can see there are certain people who did extreme acts of giving. And they did so sacrificially. We have the wise men who came to Jesus early on in his story to offer up the gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Those are costly gifts. We don't know how many men there were, but they came together and they did what they could and they gave these gifts specifically. We have the story of this widow who gives all that she has. We have the story in Mark 14 of this lady named Mary of Bethany who anoints Jesus with an alabaster flask of perfume. And in certain translations, in certain versions of this story, we understand that that was a year's worth of wages. She gave a year's salary to worship Jesus. We have the story of the little boy who gives his lunch so that Jesus could feed the thousands. We have Joseph of Arimathea who gives his tomb that he's not using so Jesus could have a place to be buried. The gifts we see here, the women were prominent in giving sacrificially. The men, well, Joseph only had to give it up for 3 days, then he could use it again. The wise men, we don't know, they kind of collected together. But these two women that we read about, they gave everything sacrificially. They were the leaders in this movement of worshiping Jesus with all that they had. Guys, we need to step up the plate just a little bit more. We should be known as the leaders of generosity who give sacrificially. Guys usually give more of their time and energy more than money, so I'll give you a little bit of a break there. But notice that all of these acts of giving and generosity that cost so much were acts of worship. I love the way that David said this in the Old Testament. He was not willing to give to God something that cost him nothing. If he was going to honor God, it was going to cost him because God gave everything. So who am I to hold back anything from the one who gave everything? But I also want you to see that generous people give, well, they do give everything they have. And again, this isn't about money. This is about the attitude of worship. The sacrifice of giving of our time, of our skills, of our talents. Yes, and our money. But generous people give all of that. They give everything. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 9 puts it this way. Honor the Lord with your possessions, with all that you have. This woman, this widow, wasn't reckless with her money, wasn't foolish with her money. She was living by faith. She was trusting God. And so when we see that she gave all of her money, the money that she was going to need for food, for shelter, for clothing, she gave that all to God. What she was doing was saying, God, I trust you to provide what I need when I need it. So this widow, She was an active participant in worship, and she gave with a clear purpose of honoring God with all that she had. She had that strong resolve to make sure that nothing was going to stand in her way of honoring God in this way. And she was trusting in God's promise. Jesus puts it this way in Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount. He said, look at the birds of the air. Doesn't God provide for them everything they need? Consider the flowers of the fields. In all their beauty, no one's clothed like they are. So if God cares for the birds and the flowers, how much more is He going to care for your needs and provide for you? When we trust God with everything, that's when we experience His faithfulness in everything. That's the point of today's message. That generous people trust God with everything they have. And they honor God with everything they have. Just like in this story, Jesus is still watching how we give. He's watching your heart as you give of your time and your energy and your effort and your money. He's watching how you give, and He sees what you give, but more importantly, He sees why you are doing it. And I want you to know, as a pastor of this church, I have no idea what anybody gives. I don't handle the money in that way. I'm not at all observing what you give or who gives what or anything like that. This is more about the heart, because that's what I'm concerned about. That's what God is concerned about, is your heart of worship. So what would it take for us to be a people of generosity like this widow? What would it take for us to acknowledge that our offerings, our time and our talents, our acts of worship? What would it look like if we were to give willingly and sacrificially, and we were to give everything to God this week? What would that look like for you? We'd probably look a little different than the rest of the world. We'd do things a little bit differently. And I think that's the point, is Jesus watched this widow give everything, not out of guilt, not out of pressure, but out of an act of faith and worship. And that's what we are challenged with today. So as we have our time of invitation, I want you to really search your heart. I want you to see and observe. And trust me, if you are one of those that has you gave out of your need and desperation as much as out of your surplus or your prosperity, your wealth, great. Then take this as an encouraging message. But if we could do better, if we could trust God with more, then I also want you to hear that challenge as well.